To understand how someone becomes America's sweetheart, and then chooses to walk away from that title, you have to go back to a version of her that had nothing to do with Hollywood at all. She was born Margaret Mary Emily and Hira on November 19, 1961, in Fairfield, Connecticut, the daughter of a math teacher and a woman who had once dabbled in acting herself. Her parents split when she was a teenager, and by the time she graduated from Bethel High School in 1979, her plans pointed toward journalism, not film sets. She enrolled first at the University of Connecticut and then at New York University, chasing a degree in writing rather than a spot in front of a camera. Like most college students, she needed money, and commercials paid better than anything else available to a 19-year-old with a good smile. She started booking small television spots, the forgettable kind that exist only to sell soap or cereal. But something in those brief appearances caught the attention of casting directors. There was an ease to her on camera, a warmth that read as completely unforced. That quality, almost by accident, opened a door she hadn't been looking for. In 1981, at 20 years old, she made her feature film debut with a brief appearance in Rich and Famous. It was a small part, but it was enough to nudge her further into acting, and soon she adopted the professional name Meg Ryan, borrowing her grandmother's maiden name for her Screen Actors Guild card. She landed a role on the CBS daytime drama As the World Turns, where she stayed from 1982 to 1984, sharpening her craft in front of a national television audience long before most people knew her name. By the time she moved to Los Angeles in 1984, she wasn't a star yet, but the pieces were beginning to fall into place. Her early years in Los Angeles were a mix of small roles and larger opportunities that hadn't quite arrived yet. In 1986, she appeared in Top Gun, playing Carol Bradshaw, the wife of Anthony Edwards' character Goose. It was a supporting role, but audiences remembered her warmth even in a film dominated by fighter jets and Tom Cruise's grin. The following year brought Inner Space, a science fiction comedy that paired her with Dennis Quaid. Their on-screen chemistry turned out to be real. The two began a relationship during filming that would eventually lead to marriage in February 1991. Then came 1989, and the film that would define the rest of her career whether she wanted it to or not. Rob Reiner's When Harry Met Sally, written by Nora Ephron, paired her with Billy Crystal in a story built around one deceptively simple question: can a man and a woman really just be friends? Her performance as Sally Albright, funny and neurotic and completely believable, earned her a Golden Globe nomination and cemented a scene, the diner scene, that would follow her for the rest of her life. Almost overnight, she became the face of a genre. Through the 1990s, she seemed to be everywhere. Sleepless in Seattle arrived in 1993, reuniting her with Tom Hanks in a film built almost entirely on longing and coincidence, proving that two characters could spend most of a movie apart and still generate real chemistry. 5 years later, You've Got Mail brought the same pairing into the early days of the internet, wrapping a very modern premise around a very old-fashioned kind of romance. Between those two films and a run of other hits, French Kiss, Sleepless, City of Angels, she became one of the rare actresses whose name alone could sell tickets. At her peak, she was reportedly commanding somewhere in the range of $10 to $15 million per film, putting her among the highest-paid actresses working in Hollywood at the time. But there was a cost to becoming that specific kind of famous. When an actress gets identified so completely with one image, cheerful, romantic, endlessly likable, the image starts to calcify into an expectation. Audiences didn't just enjoy watching Meg Ryan play women who found love by the credits. They came to expect that she was, in some sense, that woman. It's a strange kind of pressure, being asked to embody an ideal rather than simply perform a role, and it's a pressure very few actors manage to carry indefinitely. The turning point came in 2000, during the filming of the thriller Proof of Life alongside Russell Crowe. Reports of a romance between the two co-stars broke around the same time news emerged that her marriage to Dennis Quaid, together nearly a decade, was ending. Ryan has said in interviews over the years that the marriage had been struggling well before any of this became public. She later told InStyle magazine that infidelity on Quaid's side had been part of the story too, something she said she only fully learned about after the divorce was finalized. But at the time, none of that context reached most of the public. The narrative that stuck was simpler and far less generous: America's sweetheart had cheated. Whether or not that framing was fair, or even accurate, it took hold quickly, and it hit especially hard precisely because her stardom had been built on the assumption of wholesomeness. Proof of Life itself underperformed at the box office, and its director publicly blamed the scandal for overshadowing the film. Ryan and Crowe's relationship didn't last much beyond that, ending within a year, but the damage to her public image proved far more durable than the relationship itself. What followed wasn't a sudden disappearance, but a slower and more complicated shift. She kept working. Kate and Leopold came out in 2001, a romantic comedy that reminded audiences she could still deliver that familiar charm. But the ground underneath the genre itself was shifting. Romantic comedies were losing their grip on the box office, and Ryan herself seemed increasingly interested in stepping outside the role she'd become known for. That instinct led to one of the most striking pivots of her career. In 2003, she took the lead in Jane Campion's psychological thriller In the Cut, a dark, sexually frank film that had almost nothing in common with the light romantic comedies that made her famous. She has spoken about wanting the role specifically because it pushed against her established image. Critics were divided, audiences were largely unprepared for the shift, and the film struggled commercially. Rather than opening new doors, it seemed to widen the gap between the actress and the persona so many people still expected her to play. Around the same period, media attention started drifting away from her work entirely and toward something else: scrutiny of her face. Every public appearance generated a fresh round of tabloid comparisons, old photos set against new ones, speculation about cosmetic procedures. Ryan mostly declined to engage with any of it publicly, but the pattern reflected something bigger than her individual situation. Actresses of her generation were expected to age, but not too visibly, and definitely not too suspiciously. Trying to resist aging in any noticeable way tended to invite even harsher judgment than aging itself. It's a contradiction many women in that industry have had to navigate, and there's no clean way to win it. Rather than continuing to chase roles in an industry whose interest in her seemed to be cooling anyway, Ryan started building a different kind of life. In 2006, while single, she adopted her daughter Daisy. She spent more time raising Daisy alongside her son Jack, who she shares with Quaid. Reports over the years have also referenced ongoing health issues, including hip problems, that made the physical demands of a packed shooting schedule less appealing than they once were. Instead of treating every year as an opportunity to land the next big lead, she began prioritizing her family and projects that interested her personally rather than ones designed to keep her name on a marquee. That shift became especially clear in 2015, when she stepped behind the camera to direct and star in Ithaca, a quiet World War II drama about a young telegraph messenger, adapted from a novel by William Saroyan. It wasn't built for box office numbers, and it didn't get them, but it represented something that mattered more to her at that stage: control over her own story, rather than simply appearing in someone else's. Her son Jack Quaid and longtime collaborator Tom Hanks both appeared in the film alongside her. She went quiet again for several years after that, resurfacing in occasional television appearances, including a memorable guest spot on Curb Your Enthusiasm, before largely stepping out of the public eye through much of the 2010s. In 2018, she got engaged to musician John Mellencamp, a relationship that had been on and off for years. The engagement ended the following year. She's spoken candidly about how strange and difficult dating felt at that stage of life, admitting in interviews that navigating relationships as an adult with a public history was, in her words, just as complicated and ridiculous as it had ever been. Then, in 2023, she returned to the exact genre that had made her famous, but entirely on her own terms. What Happens Later was a small romantic comedy that she directed, co-wrote, produced, and starred in opposite David Duchovny. It wasn't designed to compete with modern blockbusters, and nobody expected it to. Instead, it felt like a quiet conversation with an audience that had aged alongside her, familiar warmth delivered with the perspective of someone who had lived through decades of both adoration and scrutiny. Around the same period, she's spoken openly about refusing to let years of public speculation define how she sees herself, choosing instead to focus on creative work and family life on her own schedule. Meanwhile, her son Jack Quaid built a substantial acting career of his own, becoming widely recognized for his role in the series The Boys, introducing an entirely new generation of viewers to the Ryan Quaid name without necessarily connecting it back to his mother's era of stardom. Looking back at the full arc of it, it's tempting to compress Meg Ryan's story into a single scandal or one controversial career choice, the Russell Crowe headlines, or the box office disappointment of In the Cut. But that framing leaves out almost everything that actually happened. Hollywood itself changed around her. The romantic comedy, the genre she had practically defined for a decade, gradually lost its central place in popular culture as audience tastes moved elsewhere. The expectations placed on actresses, particularly around aging and image, became less forgiving with each passing year rather than more. She made choices, some of which sparked genuine debate, but she was also carrying a set of expectations that very few performers could have sustained indefinitely. The assumption that the wholesome, luminous woman from a handful of 1990s films was somehow who she actually was, permanently, regardless of what she wanted for her own life. That's probably why her films from that era still hold up the way they do. Revisiting When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, or You've Got Mail Today, most viewers aren't thinking about tabloid headlines from 2000. They're responding to a specific kind of warmth and comic timing that hasn't really been replicated since, a performer who made millions of people believe, at least for 90 minutes at a time, that love was worth the risk. That quality doesn't get erased by a divorce, a difficult film, or years away from the spotlight. If there's a real measure of a lasting career, it might not be how brightly someone burns during their peak years, but how warmly people still remember them decades after the spotlight moved somewhere else. By that measure, Meg Ryan never really left at all. She just decided on her own terms what the next chapter would look like. If you have a favorite Meg Ryan film, one that still holds up for you after all these years, I'd genuinely like to know which one it is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.